Hello, and welcome to the Ros Savage Project. And at the moment, we're exploring the topic of courage. And today, I have invited a friend who I think of as being extremely courageous, although she's being very modest about that at the moment. Welcome to the show, Alex Leviton.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
It's a real pleasure to have you. So, can I kick off by asking you to just give us a brief introduction to yourself?
For the past 18 years, I've been a writer, and most people would know my work from Lonely Planet. I've written for them, I think, parts of 31, 32 guidebooks and books at this point. I did that about full time for about 10 years. I've also been editorial director of a startup and a magazine managing editor and a journalist. I have a degree in journalism from UC Berkeley. And yeah, there you go.
And I'm going to mention one of your other hats as well, just to bring us into the conversation. I can't imagine anything more terrifying than doing stand-up comedy. But you have. So just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into some of the other things that you've done.
Yeah, that my joke is that I'm a one-time stand-up comic because I've done it one time because, oh my God, that shit is hard. Yeah, it was a dream of mine. I remember in my 20s, and I remember thinking, listening when I was a kid to Steve Martin or Richard Pryor, and I always wanted to do that. And you just don't think that you have the opportunity ever in your life to just do stand-up comedy. And we'll get into this later, I'm sure, but I don't have the temperament to be a stand-up comic at all. But I just wanted to challenge myself and see if I could do it at least one time. So when my partner Yarmo, he had the opportunity to move to Chicago or New York City, and we were thinking New York, and we said, well, let's do Chicago, do Second City. And I spent 11 straight months studying improv and stand-up comedy to be able to do it one time. And that was enough.
But you had the courage to do it that one time. Can I just ask you, I want to sort of explore this a bit more now. How did you feel before you went on stage that one time?
I spent so much time preparing for those. It was, I think, 5 minutes and 20 seconds. You can go on YouTube and look up Alex Leviton and watch it. But I spent, I took a class for 2 months. I'd done improv. I'd been on stage for that. In a way, it was 5 minutes, but in a way, it was, 25 years. So when I went on stage, I actually felt pretty good because I'd done so much preparation.
Yeah, that's actually quite an interesting point, that sometimes something that would otherwise make us extremely scared, when we know we're really as well prepared as we can humanly be, it does help take the edge off the fear a bit. I just know how vulnerable I would feel getting up there. And, I do quite a lot of public speaking, and I like it if I get a few laughs along the way, preferably at the points that are meant to be funny.
Yes, always good.
Yes. It doesn't always get that way. As recently as last Saturday, I made a completely accidental joke. Anyway, that's a story for another time.
Which can be absolutely breathtakingly fearful in the other sense of the word. To be laughed at that point. Yeah, it is. It's a huge fear. And it's funny because I have a lot of fears around, being embarrassed or looking stupid in public. So the fact that I did stand up, and I'm going to take this back because I think women should not downplay our courage as much as we do. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. What I did to make it less terrifying was, choosing to move to Chicago. That was one step. Choosing to take an improv class was step two. Choosing to take a stand-up class. And I told Yarmo, he's a shy Finnish guy, and he did 10 months of improv and did it on stage. I think that's amazing. But what I told him was, if you sign up for class and you go to the first class and in 1 second you get there and you're terrified and you want to turn around and run, fine, but just sign up for the class.
That is a great story.
Yeah, and I think thanks. I think that I think that that's what a lot of people don't realize about courage is that people see things like, um, yeah, and as you've mentioned before, sometimes my physical appearance tends to throw people off. Uh, but
Which we'll
people
explain in a moment. We'll come back
will
to that.
explain that.
Now,
Yes, I would just drop
people
that bomb
watching will
out
think, yeah,
there.
people will
Um,
go, why? Why?
People
Anyway,
have no
keep
idea
going on.
why. I think that's just going to be fun. I'm just going to drop that bomb out there, and let that sit for a minute. But I think I've had to be a lot more courageous than I might have been otherwise, because of that. And so, yes, the bomb is that I'm 4'9". And so, yes, I've become a Lonely Planet author and a stand-up comic. And I actually, in my stand-up comedy class, we actually talked about it. And I said, do I need to say something when I get on stage about my height? And my teacher was like, yeah, you do. He's like, oh, I knew somebody that had one arm, and he had to say, oh, hi, I have a second job as a clock. And so I got up there, and what was the first line I said? I said, I got up and I said, okay, don't worry, everybody. I've checked with the licensing board of the Comic Association, and even if you're under 5 feet tall, you're allowed to call yourself a stand-up comic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that it's so much a matter of perspective, but again, that preparation and knowing like, okay, that's one small thing that I know would just be sitting in people's minds as I was up there, and almost in a way that that little bit bothered me as much as that. It took as much courage to get over that hump as it did to get over, oh my God, I'm doing stand-up comedy.
What you mean? Actually, making a comment, an observation about your height,
or just the vulnerability,
right. Yeah,
of first of all being funny,
yeah,
and then just being vulnerable and
yeah.
touching those deep parts of ourselves that we don't want to. I mean, I think that's what a lot of stand-up comedy and comedy is. I do a lot of humorous writing, and it's so vulnerable, and I think that's where courage comes from, is when people dance in that in those levels of vulnerability. And for me, that was doing stand-up comedy. For somebody else, it could be asking for a raise or rowing across an ocean, or it's
That's a random example that you just thought of. Yeah.
Things that might or might not seem courageous, but it's different for all of us, and I think that's, to me, there's no one version of courage. It's all relative.
That aspect of comedy where you sort of say what's going on, you name the elephant in the room. I think there's actually something kind of deeper and more powerful there as well, because, as, with one of your other hats that we haven't even mentioned yet, as a coach, I don't know about you, but when I was doing my coaching training, one thing that we were encouraged to do was to articulate what's going on. So if we're noticing a way that the clients are acting, or if we're noticing something in ourselves, it can actually be worth saying that, even if it's just something like, oh, as coach, I noticed that what you said just then took me into a completely different place, and actually I need to come back to you, to actually have the courage to say what you're feeling. Obviously can be used for comic effect, but it can also be a very serious and very useful technique, maybe even in a difficult business negotiation.
Yeah.
To kind of say, well, it seems to me this, or I'm feeling that.
Yeah, I think, and the word that comes to mind as you're saying that is whistleblower. I think, and people talk about that as being courageous or, again, stupid, which those two things can sometimes be very close to the same line. But it takes a lot of courage to doing stand-up comedy or doing comedy, doing journalism, doing coaching, doing environmental activism. I think that all of those different aspects have a little bit of that whistleblower persona, where you're willing to get in and point something out, Jon Stewart said it really, really well that, after he'd done The Daily Show for 17 years, he did an interview that was very vulnerable. And he said, yeah, this is fucking hard. And a lot of it is just because you are a whistleblower on society, on politics, on life. And as a coach, you're a whistleblower on a single person's issues. And as an environmental activist or as a journalist, you have that whistleblower persona where you're looking at something and you're saying, hey guys, this is going on and we need to look at this. It's really fun being in comedy because you can make it funny and it takes the edge off. I think it's like science fiction is a little bit like that. It takes the edge off of that, kind of in your face whistleblower, kind of pushback. But yeah, anything like that. And coaching, sometimes I'm sure as a coach, you've sat down with somebody and you can tell they don't want to hear something.
Yeah. And it could be hard. And, maybe I know it's something that I hate to upset people. And if I'm going to say something that I'm not sure they're going to want to hear, I have to really push myself. That does feel like the sort of courage that's like, oh, I'm really feeling the fear, but I'm going to do this anyway because actually I'm a coach and it's really important to me that my client sees this. And even if it really pisses them off in the short term, it's something that I'm sufficiently certain about that this is true. And I think that's what it comes down to is that truth telling or whistleblowing, however you want to phrase it. And sometimes it does make you realize how little truth there is going on in the world. There's an awful lot of beating around the bush and sort of tiptoeing around issues, and coming out and telling the truth, sometimes the blindingly obvious truth, can be really challenging because it can provoke reactions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting thing about courage. I think we all have this idea of, what courage is. And courage comes in so many flavors, and that's absolutely a huge one is I like that better. Truth telling versus whistleblowing. But yeah, having the courage. I think a lot of people have decided that, it's just going to be easier to not rock the boat too much. Sorry to use that turn of phrase, but yes. Not wanting to rock the boat is, it keeps everything status quo and things are a little more comfortable and they might not be great, but let's just keep it as is.
British person here. We are like absolute masters of this. Oh, yes. Heaven forbid we should actually, if someone pushes into the line in front of us, of course, we're not going to say, excuse me, I was in front of you. We're going to go, it's all this passive aggressive kind of stuff rather than just simply and straightforwardly and honestly speaking our truth. It's we're really quite remarkably bad at it, and to the extent that sometimes when even someone tells us a really supportive and helpful truth, there can be this sort of immediate response of recoiling from it.
Well, and you mentioned another really good point, which is culture. A lot of what it takes to be courageous in one culture versus another, they're very different, and you come up against so many things that'll push back depending on your culture. And I think in the UK, absolutely, you have that that mustn't grumble politeness, Jane Austen manners. There's a beautiful history of that for hundreds and hundreds of years, and in the US, we don't have that. We invented Twitter trolling, I'm sure. And it's, it's good and bad because you have, like I said earlier, courage and stupidity, I think, can be very, very close to the same side of the coin.
Yes, I'm not sure I've always stayed on the right side.
Yeah, exactly. And I think basically from 14 to 19 years old will prove that I stayed on the wrong side of that. And I think in the U.S., we also have this really interesting culture of ease versus challenge. And I read this article once about how there was 3 ways to go through to approach everything in your life, either from a state of ease, from a state of challenge, and from a state of stress. And I think in the US, we go from ease to stress a lot, and courage happens in the challenge.
I love that. Yeah, that's that's really interesting because there are some people who seem to be so at ease with life. It's just like they kind of surf through it. Um, and yeah, that challenge and stress thing. So am I interpreting this correctly? That some people, because actually ease can either be one of those people who seems to surf through life, or it could be that you just always go for the easy option.
Yeah.
Like you're just not up for a challenge. You're just going to go, yeah.
Well, you might be so stressed that you have no option. I mean, if you're working 3 jobs, if you've got, young kids at home, I mean, your life might be so stressful. And I think in the US, our lives are incredibly stressful right now. And all over the world, but especially, the US is kind of famous for this right now. If you have this stressful life, when you have some free time, you don't want to go to challenge. If you've been, working 14 hours a day, you're not going to want to go and rock climb for 2 hours afterwards. You're going to want to go and sit on the couch and eat some McDonald's. And so I think that we've created this culture where, stress is almost idolized. In the US,
Yeah.
people brag about like, oh, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. Well, I only got 2. I worked 19 hours. I worked 37 hours straight. And you see that all the time. And, Europe as well.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that's, this is stress, this is ease, and then challenge is in the middle. But when people bounce from one side to the other, then they miss the place where they can find their own courage.
Yes, and where they can really grow.
Yeah.
So on the cultural side, just to pick up on that, which brings us around to your travel in order to be a travel writer. I can't even remember how many different countries you've been to, but it's some incredible number.
60, 65 maybe.
Yeah, it's pretty good going.
Yeah.
And traveling in strange places and strange cultures can be challenging at the best of times. But if you'll forgive me alluding to your diminutive stature again, it can be extra challenging when you can't just hop into the first rental car that you get because you can't reach the pedals, or
Yep.
I don't know, being able to reach luggage racks on the train, or even just maybe feeling more nervous about defending yourself if you get into some kind of a dodgy situation. So
Yeah.
This is actually why I particularly wanted to invite you onto the podcast, because I just think travel is challenging anyway, but to do it when you're on the shortish side adds an extra dimension to it. And yet you chose that career. It was like you wanted to run headlong into the challenge. So what inspired that?
So to back up from that, so when I was 2 years old, my mom told me the story that there was somebody in the neighborhood who had, I think it was a pit bull. And I was 2 years old, and I would just walk right up to that pit bull and just pat it right on the nose. And she always had to watch, I was like running out in traffic and I think, so, when I say some of the things that I've done, being guidebook author, stand-up comic, I think I was just born with, and not even a sense of, danger, but just a sense of, openness of absolutely, wanting to try so many new things. And so, I mean, from the time I was a little kid, I read a book. I contacted this guy over Facebook, which is the greatest thing that Facebook was about. But when I was 10 years old, I read this book called A Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins. And I read it, probably 10 times in a row. And this changed my life. He was a hippie living in New York, going to ceramics college, and decided that he hated America and he wanted to walk across it to get to know the people. And that was it. I read that at 10 years old, and that was absolutely it. My grandparents traveled a lot. They'd bring home things from their travels. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. So before I realized that I was going to be as short as I was, I had this just natural, it's nothing, I didn't have to work it. I just had this natural inclination, personality, that I loved a challenge. I loved trying new things. And then I read this book, and yeah, I mean, that's absolutely what I wanted to do. I specifically went to a university that was the cheapest university that I could possibly go to so that I could save up money to travel. And when I realized, I realized probably in my mid-teens, when I was 14, 15, 16, just how short I was. I mean, that's one of the really nice things about being short versus other, kind of physical disabilities or physical deformities, is that, I wasn't that much shorter than other people when I was little, so to speak. And so I developed who I was, and I didn't realize until my mid-teens. And by that point, my personality was already pretty set. Granted, having said that, yeah, I mean, I've had some ridiculous challenges. My first book I did for Lonely Planet, Slovenia, I was just trying to get some bus timetables. And at the time I was 31, and I looked like I was about 17, which is actually probably one of the bigger challenges than my height, which is looking so much younger. And the bus guy would not answer my question. And he leaned back, folded his arms, looked at me and said, "How old are you?" And wouldn't believe that I was a guidebook author, and literally refused to answer my questions. And I had to wait for an hour until somebody else came in to get the bus timetable.
Wow. That's remarkable. So did you ever find it so challenging that even though you were obviously extremely motivated and you really identify with being a travel writer, like that's who you are, even though you have all these many other hats as well, were there ever times when you just thought, this is just too hard? I don't know if maybe I should reconsider my career choice?
Approximately 1,000 times.
Give or take.
Yeah, constantly. I can't drive a rental car. I'm a travel writer, and I cannot physically drive a rental car. So and you know what's actually really interesting, and this is what I like about, and again, stupidity versus bravery. Perhaps it's just pure stupidity, but I love these challenges. And so, you know how I got around both Naples and Rome? I met somebody with a scooter and a motorcycle, and I said, "I'll take you out for lunch and dinner. Take me around for the entire day on the back of your Vespa, and I'll take you for lunch and dinner." So I had these crazy workarounds. In the Caribbean, I hitchhiked through the island of St. Bart. I'm sure, these like billionaire people saw me on the side of the road hitchhiking and like thought I was, they're like, "What is this tiny little woman doing hitchhiking?" I met some of the most amazing, wonderful people. So because of the challenge, and as a coach, and this is why, I have a master's in journalism. I became a travel writer because I wanted people to have that kind of experience. Instead of writing about journalism, instead of doing anything else, that's what I wanted people to do. Because I think travel gives you that more than almost anything in the world. Is you have to challenge yourself. You're not in stress because you're traveling. You're not in ease because you're traveling. What's the option left? Challenge. So you have this, and I differentiate vacation versus travel. Vacation, you go to a beach, you lay there for 5 days, fabulous. But travel, you're in this state of constant movement, and you have the opportunity to challenge yourself in a way that you wouldn't in your normal life of ease versus stress. And that, I am where I am now because of realizing while I was traveling and having to make those little changes, that I had it in me to do that. And that, I did stand-up comedy because I traveled. I'm writing a book about finding the meaning of life because I traveled. All of those things I got to prove to myself.
The meaning of life.
I can do something.
Never let it be said that you lack ambition, Alex.
Well, I do. I mean, I can also be incredibly lazy. Like, give me a couch and some Ben and Jerry's, and I'm good for 4 hours with Netflix. And so I mean, I also love my ease. I love ease. Ease is fabulous. But I think maybe one of the differences is that I realize the three distinctions, And when I bring it up to people, once they realize it, they're like, oh yeah, I don't do challenge enough. Okay, what is in that category?
Yeah, I love that insight. Um, One of the themes that seems to be emerging from these conversations that I'm having with people around courage is that it seems so far without exception, everybody becomes motivated to do something that's challenging for them out of, well, there is that motivation. I mean, they wouldn't be motivated to do something challenging if there wasn't some sort of higher purpose that was driving them. And it usually seems to be a combination of an internal driver, but also a desire to be useful in the world. So it was interesting that you were saying, you definitely, you love to travel, but you also wanted to facilitate other people going traveling and maybe just lowering that bar to travel for them a little bit by providing useful information. So do you think that's a sort of general way, if someone feels like they're struggling for courage in a particular context, maybe they just haven't found their inner drive and their that way in which they could be useful in the world? Do you think that helps?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a terrible thing to say, but I think it's hear me out for a second. But I think sometimes that inner drive can be incredibly petty at the start. It could be, fuck this job, I hate you people. It could be jealous, whatever it is. But it doesn't have to be, I'm going to go and save the world. And it doesn't have to be that. I mean, it could just be.
It sounds like you're sort of describing my path towards courage, actually. Yeah, you're right. I don't think it has to start out with any kind of noble cause.
Right?
It could be even, I don't know what I want, but I know it isn't this.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I think the biggest misconception. And I'd love to hear you say this, that like you've wrote Oceans and like, yeah, I mean, was it I hate this job and I just want to get out of here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There were lots of things that I was actually just trying to get away from without knowing what I was moving towards. And it was really only once I'd got myself out of some of those things that I was, because I was bouncing between stress and ease the rest of the time. Yeah. I did take on, I did a couple of marathons while I was still working in the office. So those were my challenges. And I suppose it was those marathons that made me realize that challenge feels good. It feels really good. Yes. But a large part of the reason I did the running was because it felt like it was one area of my life where I had some kind of control. And, in my professional life, I just wasn't feeling that. So in a way, even the running was needing something that wasn't my job and wasn't me collapsed on the sofa.
Yeah, exactly. And you didn't say one day, okay, you know what? I'm going to row 3 oceans. I mean, you said, I'm mad at my job. I kind
of did, but that was a lot later.
Exactly. And good point. But you said, I'm feeling angry. What am I?
Yeah.
Or I'm feeling
frustrated. I'm really frustrated in my job.
Yeah. And then you said, okay, what does this frustration mean? And I mean, will you tell me what were the steps that led you to make, and you did, you did say one day, okay, I'm going to row oceans. But were there steps? And I think that's what people really, it's such a misconception about courage. And that's why I love that you're doing this book and these podcasts, is that people, I think, see people who do, stand-up comedy or traveling or rowing, things like that. And they're like, oh, I could never do that. Well, I could never do this either. You could have never done this either. It's not like we weren't born this way. It literally took so many oar strokes and steps to get to that point.
So that's actually, we talk about maybe having the courage to start the journey, but maybe it doesn't look at all like courage. And another one of my pet theories that's evolving is that from the inside, we never feel courageous. We're mostly just we're extremely aware of our own fear. We're not feeling particularly brave when we do these things. But I think This is a really interesting point that maybe the first step on that path doesn't look even a little bit courageous. It just looks like something's got to change.
Well, yes and no. It doesn't look courageous, um, but that's what courage is that first step. So, signing up for the stand-up class, just being frustrated, and you could have just been frustrated and, burned down the building, or, you were frustrated and said, what?
I thought of it.
Exactly, which probably helped you.
It made me feel better,
Exactly.
a lot better.
But it made you take a step that made you take a step that made you take a step that made you take a step, and then you rode three oceans.
And even that first step, I think, as we're saying, it can be a rejection of something. It doesn't even have to be a positive step. It can just be that realization that life is going to change in some way, and becoming open to that. And, for a lot of people, it's like life has to change in some way because I just can't go on like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you probably see that with coaching clients as well. And there are certain people that I've said, you're not ready for coaching right now. Come back to me when you are. And there's, and again, this fine line, there's the mentality of, okay, I'm going to do this. That was hard. Okay, you know what? I'm still going to do this. Oh, that was really hard. Okay, you know what? And then there's this mentality of, okay, I'm going to do this. That was hard. All right, I'm done. And that's where, very few of us do things, all at once. I mean, and then, we can also talk about courage and heroism, and, Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford prison experiment guy, and all of his, and he talks a lot. Yeah, and he talks a lot about people who do heroism. I think that's a very different thing. All of a sudden, if somebody's thrown into something and you have to, dive onto a subway track to save somebody from being run over, something like that. But I think and we never know, we have no idea who's going to be a quote unquote hero. And I think a lot of people think of courage as heroism. They think that.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I think courage happens in stages, and a lot of it is about openness, and quite frankly, just stupidity.
I knew I was going to sneeze then. Yes. Well, I suppose one person's courage is another person's stupidity. It's often, well, actually, it's often judged in terms of the outcome. The motivation may be the same. The actions may have been the same, but if it goes badly, then it tends to look stupid rather than heroic. Do you think, maybe this with coaching hat on, do you think that maybe that's part of women's challenge with courage, or regarding themselves as being courageous, is because they think it has to be some magnificent feat of heroism? Well, actually, first of all, I suppose I've muddled a few questions together there. Do you think that women struggle, or some women sometimes struggle, to be courageous?
I think, yes. I think everyone struggles to be courageous. And I also think that people don't give themselves enough credit for the courage that they're embodying in their day-to-day lives.
Yes. So is that something that you get clients to do, is to think of times when they have acted courageously?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure we can all think of something that we've done in our lives that was hard, that we felt the fear and did it anyway.
Well, and think about it, if you think about it from this different perspective of where, courage is really just a form of, challenge that goes successfully. I mean, if I did badly in stand-up, that video would be nowhere on YouTube. No, I would never tell anybody I did it, and I would just walk away and never mention it again. It went well. I'm thrilled. So yeah, woohoo! Check out my courage.
You watch the video, by the way, folks. It's really good. Very funny.
Oh my God, you have no idea. I mean, out of everything I've done, the fact that I did one stand-up and that was actually funny, I'm thrilled about that. But if it went badly, we would not be talking about it right now. Trust me. But having people realize those things, for me, I can kind of be a ham and I like comedy. So doing something like that, yes, it took courage, but I have, everyone kind of has their blind spots. And that's the place where I love seeing people enact courage. For some people, it's, if they have a fear of abandonment, getting into a relationship can be incredibly courageous. If they have a fear of public speaking, or social anxiety, just starting a conversation at a bar can be the most courageous thing they've ever done. So I think courage, we have this idea of what it looks like. I've probably done, 100 things that I thought of as more courageous than doing stand-up comedy. But that's because when I see something in my blind spot and I work and I decide to give myself that challenge, that feels, it's funny because I haven't even really thought of, what is courage until you asked me this. And I went and I did, and I made a list of everything that I felt like, the past out of my life, what are some things that felt courageous? I think every single person in the world should do this. And, they'll find these threads of things that feel courageous. And it doesn't have to look like doing stand-up comedy on stage or traveling the world or rowing oceans. It doesn't have to look like that. For me, putting myself out there in other ways, that's harder. Going on stage, you can't really be, abandoned on stage, or, you're there, so you don't have to worry about that. But it's wherever you feel vulnerable, how can you take one step toward challenging yourself in that aspect? And that's to me, that's courage. No matter what that looks like to anybody else, that's courage.
So it's proving that sort of courage that we prove to ourselves, like when we do something that maybe maybe we never share that story, but we're the one person in the whole world that knows that one thing scares us, and then we do it despite our fears, and that feels really good. Then we could probably take that into other areas of our life as well. So wow, this time has absolutely flown by. Alex, we could talk forever, and in fact sometimes we do. I suppose just in our last few minutes, you do seem to have this sort of lion-hearted approach to life, that you'll be aware of something that scares you. And it seems to me that you don't like being scared by something, so you will sort of run headlong at the pit bull and
absolutely
pat it on the nose. Would you be able to share how you muster your resources to do that? What are you sort of feeling? What are you thinking? How are you making yourself move forward into that scary situation?
That is such a good question. I've literally never thought about it that way in my entire life.
Okay.
You ask somebody who's neurotic in their own head constantly a question, and I say I've never thought about it. What does it take to muster?
Or should I rephrase it? What is it that enables or drives you to do that? Do you think it's something innate in you? Do you think you've developed skills that enable you to pat the pit bull, to stick with that metaphor?
And call me in 2 weeks and I'll probably, have a much better thought to answer. But thinking about it now, I think part of it absolutely is, maybe 40%, or, nature versus nurture, whatever I was just born with. And I think part of it is that, I'm not a very ambitious person, but I'm not even that driven of a person.
Hang on, the ambitious person who's writing a book about the meaning of life.
Yeah, but I'm not actually that ambitious. It's an internal, God, what is it? And again, it's this kind of petty, like I just want things to be better, and I love that, the truth telling, whistleblowing that we were talking about. I love finding something, I started reading philosophy when I was extremely young, and I'm fascinated by how the brain works and how we work and how society works. And I just, I could spend 16 hours a day thinking about how to make that better. And I mean, this is why, again, journalism and coaching and, comedy, I just want to turn that over again and again and again and again forever and ever and ever. As you know, we've had many 2-3 hour conversations over a pint or three. But I think it's, not everybody, I mean, thank God. And this is also the flip side of that coin. It's really annoying to have this personality trait. I mean, it's really annoying. And I cause myself all sorts of pain and get in all sorts of horrible situations because I'm so open to everything that, it's not always a good thing at all in any way, shape, or form. And so I don't want people to approach life as I do because it's a giant pain in the ass. So a lot of the courage from me comes from basically just kind of being neurotic and just having this drive, to turn something over until I get it right, to not stop until I get something right.
Yeah, so it's this sort of quest for mastery, whether that's mastering fears or a skill. I'm not sure that's quite the right phrase.
It's we're getting there. And I think, I'm quite honest, I do think it comes from, I have this neurotic side. And, I always, and it's not perfectionist, but it's more neurotic that I want to think about things and how to do things better. And, and put systems in place and also, just one thing we haven't talked about is that, as you know, I have a lot of physical limitations, and not just height, but also medical issues and birth defects and things like that. And so I've spent a lot of time, in bed and at doctors. And so when I go back, and that's, and I'm forced to be in ease a lot. And so there's this drive when I am feeling better. I was very sick for a lot of my childhood, and I had a couple operations, and I felt much better. I became the coxswain of a crew team. Like
Perfect.
5 months after surgery. Like, yes, I was terrible, and I quit a month later because I was just so god awful. But yeah, and I think that again, and that's what I'm talking about, that petty stuff. I mean, it was basically like, I've been sick all the time. I'm annoyed. I feel a little better. Oh my God, what can I go and do? So it didn't come from this, oh, I'm going to be courageous. It came from like, oh God, I've spent most of my childhood in bed. This sucks. I want to go and do something.
Yeah. So there's that real sense of drive. Just, what can I do while I'm feeling healthy? That's going to make my life meaningful and make the world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody has that for themselves. And all people have to do, I think, is just go one step at a time. And it's going to be different for everybody's level is totally different. And I have the utmost respect for somebody whose biggest fear is to ask for something and they ask for a raise. I mean, that to me just gives me chills, that there's so much courage in that asking. But it's just that one step forward. And, we happen to be on different levels for different things. But I don't think it's objective. I think it's totally subjective.
Yeah. And that we need to respect our own forms of courage and not compare it with other people's courage, because we've all got our own path to tread. Yeah, I think that's very affirming. Okay, so that sounds like a really good bit of homework to write down a list, and you do like your lists, a list of times that you've been courageous, and then really use that to give yourself some affirmation and say, yeah, I can do these things, and that probably would give the impetus to get out there and try a few more things that are scary.
Yeah, exactly. And look at that list and say, where can I take one more step on one of these things? It's literally that easy. And then just never, ever stop. Where can I take one more step? And then never stop. Done. Easy, right?
Well, right. We've got that one sorted. Alex,
5 million horse strokes, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Keep taking the steps, keep taking the all strokes,
Exactly.
keep feeling the fear and doing it anyway.
Yep.
Alex, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your lists. And good luck with writing your book this summer.
Thank you. We will be checking in. I know.
Accountability buddies, yes.
Exactly.
It's been a real pleasure talking with you today. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun to even think about this. I'm going to have a much better answer for you soon.
Well,
last question.
I'll still be writing the book. So if you think of something that you wish you'd said, then please wing it on over.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I wish you such luck with this book.
Yeah. Likewise. Take care, my dear.
Talk to you soon. Bye.